Well, Oregon's been active in the transfer portal. Where do some of the new guys fit into the depth chart right now? Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time on a Friday. Once again, for Locked On Ducks, I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show if you're on YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So, I was going to do this sort of show on like Wednesday or so. The news just keeps on coming in. The good news and also the bad news is football doesn't happen again for a few months when we have the spring game and such. But lots of offseason moves to talk about. Let's dive into them. Evan Williams is coming to the Ducks. Before I had a chance to preview the potential of Evan Williams coming to Oregon, he announced that he is going to do just that with 1 year of eligibility remaining. Now, for some of you Duck fans out there, I understand your hesitation in saying, wait, why would we want Bennett Williams' brother? Because Bennett did some nice things, but he got exposed in coverage a couple of times this year, which is true. I will say again what I've said about Bennett Williams for the last couple of months. From the first down marker up to and behind the line of scrimmage, he's really good. And then once you get beyond that, he really struggled this year. Now, Evan was a first-team All-Mountain West performer in 2021 as a junior. He led the Bulldogs in tackles that year. You might remember in 2021, Fresno State, that team came in Autzen Stadium, very nearly walked away with a W. Yeah, was not the most settling way to begin that season. Got a little bit better the next week, as we all remember, in Columbus. Oh, gosh, that was a great day. But he led the team in tackles that year. And this is not just any Mountain West G5 program. Fresno State has been a Pac-12 killer the last couple of seasons. I mean, they have been all over the place, not just playing, but beating Pac-12 teams. They almost beat Oregon. They played USC in a competitive fashion this year. They beat UCLA last year. They beat Washington State this year in the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl. They took Oregon State down to the final snap of the game, and a Jack Coletto touchdown won it for them. They have been a really good program, even though they've had a couple of coaching changes, right? DeBoer was there, but now Jeff Tedford is back. They won the Mountain West this year, and Williams, out of eligibility there, has got 1 left, and he is going to spend it with the Ducks. He was an honorable mention player in the Mountain West as a sophomore, but that junior season, 2021, is the one that really, really stood out. He led the team in tackles with 93. That's a lot for a safety, and interceptions with 3. He's 6'1", 194 pounds. Bennett Williams, on the other hand, is 6 feet tall, 205 pounds. So they're of similar stature. However, from what I know about Evan Williams, it's tough to find highlights on him, but I think he's a little bit more rangy, a little bit more of the free safety type, though still is certainly, a guy with plus size. But the question will certainly be here, and I think understandably so, if, the Ducks defensive staff is seeing this as a replacement from one guy to the other, and hard to say at this point in time whether or not that's the case. The biggest question for him is going to be, how is he going to be able to defend in space? How is he going to be able to play over the top of the defense? But I think that's the sort of player that Oregon really needs here. So if he can be that would be most helpful. Statistically, he took a step back this season. He had 66 total tackles, no picks, and 4 pass breakups. I wouldn't worry about that a ton. I'm not saying you should ignore it completely, but I wouldn't put that up there and say that it's a red flag. I just bring it up to give you the full context and picture of the player that Oregon is adding here. But Fresno State as a team got off to a really bad start this year. I mean, a really bad start. They were, I think, 1-4. They ended the year 10-4. So as a team, things were not really gelling the way that they were hoping to begin the season, but they ended in an exceptionally strong way with a dominant showing against Washington State down in Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium in the LA Bowl. And he's a guy who's been a staple in their defense for the last couple of years on a good Mountain West team. And now he comes to the Ducks. And the question, I think, becomes, as I posed at the beginning of the show, where does he fit in to the depth chart? There are a lot of bodies at the safety position. But I think the reason that this staff wanted to bring in a guy like Evan Williams is because he's got a lot of experience. He's played 4 seasons of college football. He was first team All-Mountain West in 2021, and as a sophomore the year before, he was honorable mention. You know who else went on that same sort of trajectory? Christian Gonzalez. He was, I think, a first-teamer this year. He was honorable mention at Colorado last year. Upward trajectory, right? So is he taking a step up in competition? Yes, of course he is. But right now, he joins a safeties room that still has some question marks in terms of who's going to return and who isn't. Because we know some names, but we don't know all the names. So the other safeties on the roster, as of now, as I record this, at 5:04 p.m. Mountain Time on Thursday, January 12th, 2023. You are listening to this on Friday, January 13th. Technology is amazing, isn't it? Also in 2023. The other safeties on the roster, Jamal Hill, Steve Stevens, Brian Addison, J.J. Greenfield, and Damon David. Those are the players who have playing experience. We know Jamal Hill has played a lot of football. He's more of a strong safety, kind of hybrid linebacker, right? More apt to fill the Bennett Williams role than to be a true free safety over the top, which is something Oregon needs. Steve Stevens is a little bit more of that free safety type. We saw him do that at times this year. Brian Addison, same thing. We don't know what those two guys are going to do. Those three, really. J.J. Greenfield, Damon David, they played sparingly this year. Neither one of them, I'd say, wowed me, but neither one of them played and made me think, oh, wow, he doesn't belong on the field. He can't play or anything like that. I thought they had moments. I thought Greenfield early in the Holiday Bowl was really good. I thought he was really, really good. And then as the game went on, he was kind of in and out of the rotation. But those are the 5 guys who are on the roster right now with playing experience. And then there are 3 guys on the roster, all of whom are 4-star recruits. Trajan Williams, 2022, didn't play this year. Tyler Turner, Cody DeCambra, 2023, coming in this season, who will be there as true freshmen. So I don't think Oregon will add another transfer at the safety position, but I thought they needed to before this announcement. I'm not saying Evan Williams is a home run or he's a disaster or anything. I think we don't really know, right? He wasn't a super highly rated recruit coming out of high school. He didn't have a composite rating, but he was given a 3-star rank just by 24/7 Sports. So there weren't a ton of big name schools after him. That's part of the reason he went to Fresno State. But I think Oregon adding this guy makes a lot of sense because they want someone who they don't have to teach the position to. Because Dan Lanning and company they're loading up this roster to compete. That's what they're doing. College football is a year-to-year basis, and you have to have your eye on the future at least a little bit. But overall, you're going all in every year and trying to make the best of that situation. And I think that I think he does help with that. So another thought or two on the safeties, and then the other guy who I talked about with my guy Richie Bradshaw of Locked On Sun Devils, Connor Soelle. Where might he fit in, and could he throw his name into the hat here? What am I talking about? I will tell you. I will also tell you that BetOnline is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. They've had everything. College bowl season, basketball, World Cup, they've had it all. They'll continue to have it all at betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. Alrighty, rolling on here. And the safeties, you know, I like the prospects of a Tyler Turner, of a Cody DeCambra, or even a Trajan Williams potentially, and what they could do. But when you're looking at experience, the guys who have the experience, right? I think Brian Addison was the best of the bunch, and even he was a little inconsistent at times this year and not great when he was forced to be in man-to-man coverage. I think he was pretty good at being a rangy safety over the top, but not spectacular. Played great in that UCLA game, of course. Had some other good moments against Cal. He had a nice interception, but all of the other guys, Jamal Hill, Steve Stevens, J.J. Greenfield, Damon David, they're all different sorts of safeties, but the thing that they have in common is we know that none of them are the sort of explosive, dynamic, game-changing players, and Addison is in this group as well, that Oregon was missing on the back end this year. That's what we know about the safeties, and that's why they're willing to bring in a guy like Evan Williams, but I do think with that many names, I mean, that's a lot of guys. That's a lot of guys to have at the safety position. Now you have two, and who's a strong safety and who can play the star position that Bennett Williams played, and who can do. You can shuffle them around, but that's 8 guys on the roster right now who are listed as safeties. And Evan Williams would make 9. So it wouldn't surprise me if in the coming days we hear that 1 or 2 of these guys is either in the portal or deciding to just, end their football careers, because Steve Stevens, Jamal Hill, Brian Addison have all been around for quite a long time. We'll see how it evolves on that front, but Williams certainly feels like a guy who gets inserted into the starting lineup right away. I don't think you bring in someone who's got 1 year of eligibility. Think of Chase Cota. He reminds me a lot of Chase Cota. Not the high school recruiting portion, but the reason you bring him in. You've got some promising young players. He's a veteran. He's been productive. You know what you're going to get. He might not be an All-American caliber player, but he could still be a very good player and an important player for your offense, and an upgrade from an experience standpoint from what you might otherwise have. I think that is what the staff's thinking here, bringing in Evan Williams, and which safety position or role do they think he's most adept to fill? Time will tell, and that's something I'll definitely watch for. Reading practice reports or the spring game when that comes around. Gosh, I can't wait for the spring game. But portal's still open, 5 more days. Still got a ways to go on that front. But I do think Evan Williams comes in and starts on that. Before I get to Sully, I'm only going to refer to him as Sully, just like they call the pilot Sully Sullenberger, who landed that plane on the Hudson River. There's a great stand-up comedy bit by Billy Gardell about that, by the way. Hilarious. So Billy Gardell's fantastic. The stand-up is called Halftime. You can look it up on Spotify or Pandora or maybe YouTube even. I don't know. It's really funny. I promise it's worth your time. The whole thing is worth your time, frankly. It's called Halftime. Listen to it on Spotify. But before I get to my man Sully, I want to give a shout out to all of you, because recently here in Locked On Ducks, on the YouTube side of things, there are hundreds more on the podcast side, but on YouTube, we just hit 2,000 subscribers, and I am so humbled that you choose to spend any amount of time with me doing that. I am humbled and honored that it has gotten to the point where it has, and I would love to keep growing the show, and it looks like we're on that sort of trajectory. That's my goal here. Keep growing the show, keep growing this wonderful community that has become such an integral part of my life in more ways than one, and it's something that I truly get joy out of doing. So thank you so much for that. I've been hosting the show for just over a year. When I took it over, there were, I think, 8 subscribers on the YouTube channel, and to be over 2,000 right now is beyond anything I imagined. It really, really is. So thank you so much for making that happen. All right, let's get to my man Sully. So I have this lingering thought about Sully. He's 6'1", 220 pounds, and I just wonder. Could he play safety? Could they move him to that Bennett Williams role, play him primarily in the box? Could he play safety? Maybe they don't. Maybe he's just a smaller linebacker. But just for reference here, Jeffrey Bassa is 6'2", 215. So basically the same body type. Jeffrey Bassa, coming out of high school, was a safety. Jeffrey Bossa, outside linebacker this year, graded very poorly on PFF, had some nice moments, but overall looked like he was undersized. He got pancaked and cleared out of the way far too often by offensive linemen. And when he tried to blitz him one-on-one up the middle, it often didn't go that well for him. He did look really good in the Holiday Bowl, but over the course of this season, he did not have the sort of year I was thinking he might have. To be fair to my take back then from August, I thought they would move him back to safety into that Bennett Williams role. I still wonder if that'll happen. I still wonder if that'll happen, especially with the Soelle addition, with the Justin Jacobs addition, with Keith Brown looking like he is a legitimate player for Oregon's defense going forward. I wonder about all of those things. So Soelle, he could come in and start at linebacker. I think of all the transfers Oregon's gotten so far, he's the least likely guy to slide in and just be a starter right away. I think every other guy pretty much that Oregon's added via the portal this offseason probably going to end up being an instant impact day one starter, right? Jacobs and Trayshawn Holden and Jordan Birch most recently, of course. I think all those guys look like they will be starters right away. Soelle, it just seemed, just based on his track record at Arizona State, he's the most likely guy to either be a special teams player primarily, which I'd be totally fine with, by the way, because Oregon special teams were dreadful this year in the punting game. Boyle was pretty good at touchbacks. Camden Lewis was good kicking field goals. Everything else about special teams pretty much stunk. So you need special teams players like that, and maybe he turns in that. Maybe he is the starting linebacker. Maybe he and Jacobs are the two guys, and Bossa rotates in, and Keith Brown rotates in from time to time, and you see glimpses of a Harrison Taggart or a Devin Jackson. Maybe, I don't know. But I do wonder with that body type whether or not they add him and think, is this a guy who we're going to slide over to the safety position? Because remember what I said. You got three guys there, your most experienced guys at the safety position. None of them are a surefire thing to come back right now. Jamal Hill, Steve Stevens, Brian Addison. We don't know. We're still waiting to hear, and Oregon's still over the scholarship limit. So I don't know. And by the way, on that front, my man, Mr. Eddie the Dog, asked this question a while back, and I was looking to get a definitive answer, and I actually got one just before I came on to record the show. Hey, Spencer, can NIL become a direct payment for school and scholarships, a way to get over 85 with direct payment? Basically, what he's asking here is, could a student athlete forfeit his scholarship and then get money through NIL to pay for his school and then open up a scholarship roster slot as a result on the football team for the 85 the football team is allowed to issue? Because you're not restricted to 85 players, you're restricted to 85 scholarships. You can have more than that total with walk-ons and such. So I did get an answer on this from someone who I shall not name, but knows more or less what he is talking about quite well. It's a fascinating question. And technically speaking, the answer is yes, it is possible. However, it hasn't started happening yet. And the other thing you have to consider, Mr. Eddie the Dog, is if you're going to get enough money through NIL to pay for a scholarship or to pay for your school, essentially, what a scholarship would have been worth, that can't be a $5,000 kickback from a local mom and pop tire shop endorsement or something like that, right? It has to be a substantial amount, because a scholarship is typically, though technically a year-to-year basis, is basically going to pay for 4 years of your school. Well, that's a lot of money. That's getting into the six-figure range. So now it would also depend on how much eligibility some of these guys have, right? So like technically speaking, with Evan Williams, if he came in and said, no, I won't take a scholarship, I'll get an NIL opportunity here, someone will make it, however much the enrollment is at Oregon. I haven't looked it up recently, but it's not the most expensive school in the country. I don't think it's the cheapest either. That could technically work. We haven't started to see it yet, but in theory, Is that possible? Could a program such as Oregon do that? Yes, it is technically possible. Haven't seen it at this point in time, but I got an answer on that, and he'd been waiting to hear the answer to that question, so I wanted to slide that in since it came up. Thank you for the question, as always. Also, no, I did not forget about Cam McCormick. I'll get to that on Monday. Just a lot of news all the time talking about the Ducks. Last couple of questions here to wrap up this show on a Friday. And actually, we'll just do one question here, because you guys send in so many great questions. I don't want to ever shortchange one, just to squeeze it in and pack it in. Like we got some time here. So GWG 5640, I will answer your question on probably Monday's show. Concerning the depth chart, though, Eric Lammerman asks, and you can ask a question too, YouTube, Twitter, really easy to get in touch with me. I make it as easy as possible. At Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks are the handles. YouTube comments always wide open. I monitor them daily. Do you think Mase Funa, who's returning to the Ducks, could play inside linebacker or split time between inside linebacker and the edge? This is an interesting question. So for those of you who don't know, those are two very, 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 very different positions. Someone who's listed as an edge player, right, like Mateo Uyunglele, for instance, is going to typically line up, right, in a 4-2-5 scheme with 4 down linemen as the outermost defensive lineman, but more often than not, they're going to be standing up, and they're going to be there when there is at least a decent chance the other team is going to be passing the ball. Though Mase was in on running situations defensively as well, I don't think he was in there in like a goal line package as frequently, for instance, because you typically want bigger bodies in there to try and stuff up the running lanes, because teams are typically going to be going to the ground. But Mase coming out of high school, I think at one point in time he did kind of roam around that inside linebacker range, but I think there's 2 reasons that I don't see him making that jump back. Number one, he's pretty big. Like when you look at him, yeah, he looks like an edge player who's somewhere in between a linebacker and a defensive lineman, but that's the position he now knows quite well. And if you're going to play at inside linebacker, you have to cover a lot more than you do as an edge player, right? An edge player, again, another differentiating factor from a defensive lineman, can more easily be dropped into coverage because he's typically a more athletic build, just a little bit more slender than a Brandon Dorlus, for instance. Like Dorlus is never going to drop into coverage. Jordan Birch will probably almost never drop into coverage, but you can drop Mase Funa. You could have dropped DJ Johnson. He was a little slow in coverage, but you could do it because, he played tight end. Or Kayvon Thibodeau, for instance, edge player. You can drop him into coverage. Mase is capable of doing that, but I don't think he's someone who you'd want covering a tight end man-to-man over the middle, a running back out of the backfield, or doing anything more in coverage than dropping into the flat and just having that assignment for a halfback coming out or a receiver who's, just kind of sitting down essentially, or serving as de facto contain for a quarterback. I think he'd have to lose a little weight, but he'd also have to lose, or he'd have to gain in a significant way that ability. And that's just asking a lot for a guy who's been at edge and I think succeeds much better there. And he did not have a great year rushing the passer, but he made some pretty good plays in the running game. And is he a high-level starter? No. Is he a starting caliber player? Yes. And so unless a guy is facing severe competition at that position group, which he is facing more now with Mateo and Birch coming in, and maybe a couple other guys on the roster, but most notably those 2, when you're facing more competition, yeah, you might consider, you might be better off over here. But there are not enough high-level players of Mateo's or Birch's caliber that would be able to push him out of being a starting edge player or a regular rotation player going into next year. So I don't see him as someone who would make that drop back. And the other thing, too, is I don't think Oregon needs him to. I think Oregon needs a guy of that body type at the edge position more than they need someone at the linebacker position, because you've got Justin Jacobs. He's probably going to be one of the starting linebackers. Well, you got Keith Brown. They might keep Jeffrey Bossa at linebacker. You've got Devin Jackson waiting in the wings, and Harrison Taggart potentially if one of them pops after redshirting this year. And then you've also got Keith Brown, who looked really good. I hope Keith Brown plays a lot in 2023. I was really impressed with him in that Holiday Bowl, as I talked about. And I just look at the edge position versus the linebacker position, making that jump, the body type that he is. I think that all adds up to Mase Funa not going to inside linebacker or playing that position. It doesn't mean he couldn't, but I don't think it's a change that is needed enough to where you would make a guy do that. Like DJ Johnson was recruited as an edge prospect, but had to go to tight end. Why? Because Oregon had a bunch of injuries at that position. Cam McCormick among them. Gosh, can't wait to talk about Cam McCormick on Monday's show. But there were a bunch of injuries that necessitated that move. But I'm not so sure DJ Johnson's development as a player wasn't stunted by the fact that he had to play a bunch on the offensive side of the ball. I think he's more well-suited, though he did a great job at tight end. He was a good blocker, decent pass catcher. He'd catch those Joe Moorhead RPOs in the flat, and he scored a couple of touchdowns, one in the Pac-12 championship game against USC in 2020. He did a lot of good things there. But if you want a guy to flourish, he's got to be able to grow and learn in game and in practice at the same position. Doesn't mean I'm opposed to position changes, right? I'm just saying that my threshold for determining whether or not a guy needs to or should change positions is a lot higher than what we've seen from Mase Funa at this point in time, who does need to get better rushing the passer if he's going to continue seeing the field a lot, but is solid against the run and has a sort of body type, I think almost a perfect one, prototypical of sorts, at least at the Power 5 college level. We'll see about the NFL, to play that edge position. So I don't think he will slide back to linebacker or inside linebacker, or play that position at all for those reasons. But it's a great question, one that I hadn't thought of and had to put some thought into, which is always what I enjoy and appreciate about your questions so much. Keep them coming. YouTube, Twitter, wherever you listen to or watch this show. Leave a comment or a review. Appreciate all of you. Thank you again so much for 2,000 subscriptions on the YouTube channel, and just keep hitting that subscribe button. For those of you who are new to the channel, thank you. 1,000 ways to Sunday. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.